boring, flunked out on, again, was accounting. You know, it was the single most boring subject I had ever studied. You know, I used to wake up in accounting class, and my print was all blurred. And the reason it was all blurred is because I was drooling on it, you know, things like this. So for me to have written a book on accounting is quite, you know, probably my accounting teacher and my English teacher are just, that guy, he did it again, you know. So that's why I'm really happy to have my business partner, Sharon Lecter, as my co-author of this, because she's a CPA. So all you A students out there worry, well, how can you write a book on accounting? My co-author is a CPA, so that's how it's covered here, okay, guys? The last thing about my poor dad was a very highly educated man, great guy, and he also ran for lieutenant governor of the state of Hawaii. And he ran as a Republican, which proved he wasn't that smart. But the reason I say that is Forbes magazine calls Hawaii the People's Republic of Hawaii, and it's been democratic for years, except until just recently. So my father was courageous enough, which I really respect him for. He was courageous enough to run against a very corrupt government, a government that believed in stealing and giving to themselves, you know. And it's still, as we all know, that's part of government. And it's take from the taxpayer and give to your friends. So my dad actually had the courage to run against the governor. And because he ran against the governor in the 70s, the governor said he'll never work in the state again. So I have a tremendous love and respect for my dad because he's a man who stood up for his principles. The other thing, too, is I went to Vietnam twice, once in 1966 and then in 1970s. And the reason I went to Vietnam was, even though I was draft exempt because I was working for Standard Oil, if you work for oil, you don't have to go to war. And I think that's funny, personally, but anyway. Anyway, so I went to Vietnam because both dads, my rich dad and my poor dad, said it was a son's duty to fight for his country. So both my brother and I went to Vietnam twice, and I flew helicopters in Vietnam. And when I came back from Vietnam, that's when I decided I was going to listen to my rich dad and not my poor dad, because my poor dad always said to me, go back to school, get my master's, get my PhD. And I said to my dad, what? Go get my master's and my PhD? He says, yeah, and then what? He says, then get a job with the government. I said, Dad, I think I'd rather go back to Vietnam. It's more honest. Anyway, so that's what Rich Dad, Poor Dad's about and all this. So going on, I'll quickly go into what my rich dad taught me, and it's really quite simple. Again, it goes back to my rich dad focused on financial education. And what he said was the key to being rich had nothing to do with money. He says what made a person rich or poor was their vocabulary or the power of words. So very simply said, he said that words either made you rich or poor. And he said the problem with education is that each of us as human beings has command of about 2 million, when the English language is approximately 2 million words total. And each of us has command of about 5,000 words, that's all. So if you want to increase your wealth, simply increase your vocabulary. In other words, do you know the difference between ROI and IRR? There's very big differences. Or when your stockbroker says the earnings are up, or EBITDA, what does that mean? You know, I won't go into it, but EBITDA really, from my point of view, doesn't mean anything, but my stockbroker always throws it around like it's some big deal. It doesn't mean much to me, but you have to know what it means and doesn't mean. So vocabulary or words make you rich. So once again, I'll say it. When somebody says it takes money to make money, that is not accurate. It takes words or vocabulary. And like when I was in Sunday school, I heard, you know, the words from Sunday school that the word becomes flesh. And that's how powerful words are. So my rich dad also forbade us from ever saying the word I can't. Like my rich dad always said, poor people always say I can't afford it. He says the reason poor people are poor is because they use their brain or vocabulary against them. He says you listen to poor people, they always say I can't do that, or you know, I can't afford it. He says it's not that they can't, it's very simply they're not willing to. They're too lazy. You know, I can't is a cop-out. So he forbade his son and I from ever using the words can't, and instead of using the words can't, he says, how can I? So like, how can I make $1 million? How can I become a billionaire? Not that I can't, or how can I afford my new Maserati or Lamborghini or a Porsche or house? Does that make sense to you guys here? So the most powerful piece of real estate, or the best asset you have, is actually your mind. And what fuels the mind are words. So going back to words and all this, this is an income statement and a balance sheet. This is the basis of accounting. And we'll go into why accounting is so important. This is also a financial statement. So a financial statement is made up of 3 distinct parts. One is an income statement, which says income and expense. The second is balance sheet, which is assets and liabilities. And there's a third document that's also important. It's called the statement of cash flow. And my rich dad used to say this word cash flow was one of the most important words an investor needed to understand, was where was the cash flowing. So there's 3 documents. My poor dad, because my poor dad always said to me, he says, our house is an asset. How many people have your parents that say that to you, or you say asset? And my rich dad would say that's why he's poor, is because he may be a PhD in education, but he is not very smart financially. He says he's using the wrong word to describe his house. So very simply, it goes back again to words. And my rich dad said assets, the definition of an asset is something that puts money in your pocket regardless if you work or not. So this is the cash flow pattern, this here, of an asset. So whether you work or not, it's putting money in your pocket. And a liability, then, is something that takes money from your pocket. So repeat after me. Assets put money in your pocket. What do assets do? Put money in your pocket. And what do liabilities do? Take money from your pocket. So think about this right now as you sit here. As you're sitting here at this moment, and you at home think about this, how much money is going out of your pocket whether you work or not, and how much money is coming in if you work or not. And that's the test. Is money coming in or money going out? Most people, the reason they have to go to work is because money is going out, because they have so many liabilities they think are assets. And that is the big problem here. So very simply, I'm not saying don't buy a nice house and all this, but the reason the middle class is in trouble, they keep buying bigger, bigger houses, and then as the price of the real estate went up, they keep using their house as an ATM machine. You know, it's $100,000, they pull more money out, home equity loans, pay off credit card bills. And the world says that's really smart because you're now paying off your credit card bills with your house. I mean, that's moronic because all you're doing is increasing the liability. Does that make sense, you guys here? Hello, you say that? That's very important. So the reason my wife and I were able to retire early and my rich dad got richer was he very simply kept buying more houses and properties and businesses that put money in your pocket. So I ask you to think about this right now. How many things you have are assets? In other words, if you, and let's say you're married, your spouse stopped working, how many things keep putting money in your pocket? And if you stop working, how many things keep taking money out of your pocket? That's what you know an asset or liability is. When I was in Singapore, I asked that question. I said, how many of you have good assets? And this woman raised her hand and said, I have an asset. I said, what is that? She said, it's my husband. He's a great asset, you know. Every month he makes lots of money. I said to her, I said, ma'am, I'm talking about a non-human inanimate object. And she says, that's my husband. So the point here is this, I'm not pushing real estate. Anything that puts money in your pocket, we'll be discussing some of those things that put money in your pocket. For example, you know, most people, their car is a liability. But if I use that same car as a taxi, that same car could then be an asset, okay? Well, we look at these books right here. Is every month or every quarter, Warner Books sends me a royalty check because they're selling my product for me. So this here is an asset also. Does that make sense, you guys here? Because it's putting money in my pocket. So that's very simply the difference. Okay. So that's the picture of assets and liabilities. Now, the big test here is this. When a banker looks at, you know, when you go to see your banker, as my rich dad said to me, my banker has never once asked me yet for my report card. My banker has never asked me, he said, Robert, did you have good grades? How many people have ever had your banker ask you for your grades? Some of you have. Interesting banker. My banker has never asked me what school I went to. When you go to see your banker doesn't really care about how academically smart you are. What they want to see is how financially smart you are. And the only way a banker can measure your financial IQ is by looking at your financial statement. Now, if you don't have a financial statement and a lot of people don't because they don't know what it is, then they ask for a credit report. And I don't have a credit report because I have financial statements. If you're going to play the game of money, you really do need to have financial statements. That's a very big difference here. If you don't have financials, it means that you're not serious about money. So when a banker looks at your financial statement, this is your report card. As an adult. So a banker looks at it like this, and let's say they see here's a person A comes in, and the cash flow looks like this. I mean, money in, money out. The banker knows this person is a poor person. I'll say this again. It has nothing to do with money. It has to do with cash flow patterns. So I have a friend in Phoenix. He's a doctor. He makes about $400,000 a year. The trouble is he spends $400,000 a year. How many people know people like that? And he's really proud of it. He's a doctor. He says, but I have no debt. I rent, and I paid cash for everything. So he doesn't really have anything. He just goes out. He can't stop working, even though he makes $400,000 a year, because the cash is flowing out. So whether you're a poor person has nothing to do with how much money you earn. It has to do with how you spend your money, and that's the key. When you ask most bankers, they want to know how you manage your money, how you expense it. Poor people, very simply, spend money on poor things. And the middle class spends money on middle class things, like a nice house or a nice car. And what the rich spend in are investments or other companies and things like this. So it has very little to do with your income. It has to do with how you spend your money. So the next thing is this. The middle class, what they have is a big mortgage generally. And the word mortgage, again from the word mortgage comes from the French word mortir, which means death. So most people are in debt until they die. That's something what it means here. And then they have the nice car. They're looking good, and they have huge credit card debt, home equity loans, student loans, and all this. So their cash flow, the cash flow pattern of the middle class, looks like this. So the banker looks at this and says, this person's nice middle class, good credit rating, they'll pay off their debt, but they'll never be rich, so I won't lend them much money. Okay. And then the third pattern is somebody who is rich, and they may have, number one is a business, then they'll own real estate, and then there's paper assets, such as stocks, bonds, and things like that. And for me, there's royalties. And this is the cash flow pattern of the rich here. So one of the difference between the rich, the poor, and the middle class is very simply where the cash is flowing from. So those of you sitting at home right now, think about it this way. If a banker looked at your financial statement, looking at your cash flow, looking at your report card or your financial IQ, what's a banker going to say? Is this person poor, middle class, or rich? The reason I could retire early was very simply because I have assets putting money inside here. That's very simply it. I don't have mutual funds. I don't have a retirement plan. Got that? So I know this makes a lot of people crazy because many people think their house is an asset and it's a great investment. So I'd like to explain why I say that is not accurate for me personally, because most accountants would say your house is an asset and all of that stuff. But I think that's more easily explained when you look at the cash flow quadrant here. The quadrant is my other book, and the quadrant stands for E, S, B, and I, and E stands for employee, S stands for small business or self-employed, B stands for big business like Bill Gates, and I stands for investor. And what the quadrant is about the four different people that make up the world of business. When we go to school today, most people are going to school, go to school to get a job, and our school systems are programming our minds to be employees. Or if you're a really smart person, you go to school to become, a professional person, so as people say, something you can fall back on. So these are the doctors, lawyers, or restaurateurs, small business people, and all this. My rich dad programmed me or trained me to be a business owner like Gates or Oprah and things like this, and I stands for investor. One of the reasons so many accountants disagree with me here is because most accountants, what are they? E's, S's, B's, or I's? Most accountants are E's and S's. They're not professional investors. So what I say to people is this: as a professional investor, I must live and die by not my commissions or my fees or my brokerage deals. I must live and die by my cash flow. Every month the cash flow is coming in. It's not a lot of money, but several $100,000 a month comes in whether I work or not. That's because I'm an investor. So I'll say this: It's due to a higher standard. So most accountants disagree, but most accountants are over here, and most accountants are passive investors. Most accountants have 401ks with stocks, savings, bonds, and mutual funds. If you're going to listen to this program, I'm going to take everybody to a higher standard. I'm not saying you have to go there. I'm just saying it's a higher standard. So going back again into the words here, the two words that I think are very important to understand right now is the most important word I said is this word here, cash flow. And this is cash flow. This is cash flowing into my pocket every month. Like I said, several $100,000 every month whether I work or not. And my expenses are very, very low. Most of them just keeps coming in here. And the second type of reason, second reason people invest is for capital gains. Now, capital gains, what that means here is that you buy, let's say, a stock or a piece of real estate, and the price goes up. So let me show you this. This is cash flow, and this is capital gains. 90% of the investors invest for this here, hoping the price will go up, or capital gains. And that's why so many investors think investing is risky, because they have this little crystal ball, and they're asking not investors, but salespeople or employees of big Wall Street companies and all this, what do you think the market's going to do? You think it's going to go up next year? Or if you're in real estate, you know, I bought this house for $100,000. It went up to $200,000. Should I sell now and all this? They're playing crystal ball stuff. And those are people for capital gains. I do this occasionally, but primarily I invest for cash flow. As I said, it's a higher standard. It is harder, please hear me, it is harder to get cash flow. This is easy. This is a walk in the park. The average person will buy a house and say, I bought a house for $500,000 and it already went up $100,000. I said, how do you know that? So my broker told me. Does that make sense to you guys here? It's BS, blue sky. It's not real. But that's where most people are. It's really tough to get cash flow. I mean, from my experience, I have to work really hard to get cash flow. I have to be a better investor. So the reason most accountants say your house is an asset and all this stuff, or this is fine according to generally accepted accounting practices, GAAP accounting, is because most accountants and brokers, salespeople, are over here. But if you're going to play over here, it's a higher standard. So the reason people say your house is an asset is very simply explained like this. When your banker says your house is an asset, you have to look at this. A financial statement there have to be two of them. You can't just have one. So let's say you're Mr. and Mrs. Middle Class and you buy yourself a house, and what you have here is a mortgage. Like I said, mortgage comes from the French word mortir, which means death. There it is. Now, for something to appear in the balance sheet, it must balance. So you can't have this balance on the same sheet. The only way it balances, it can't balance on your sheet. It has to balance on somebody else's financial statement. So your mortgage shows up on your bank's financial statement over here. Same mortgage. So over here, it's a liability, but over here, it's an asset. And so when your banker says to you, your house is an asset, your banker's not lying to you. The banker's just not saying whose asset it is. It's their asset. The way you know that it's an asset, again, going by the litmus test of this here, very simply, assets put money in your pocket and liabilities take money from your pocket. That's the test. That's the true definition of the words. You must use the right words. So my poor dad used the wrong words. He called his house an asset when it's really the bank's asset. So what happens here is the money comes in, hits the mortgage, it comes out the expenses, goes here, goes in here. I mean, it still doesn't go here, it goes straight up here. So the cash flow here is flowing out, which makes it a liability, but the mortgage over here is flowing in over here, which makes it an asset. And that's how you know. When you look at a regular financial statement, this is the most important line right here. Not how much money you earn, but the income coming in from your investments. That's what I'm looking at here. So that's the reason why I invest for cash flow and not for capital gains. Capital gains is gambling. It's gambling. When somebody says, I better get in and start buying because prices are going up. I don't care if it's stocks, bonds, real estate, gold. It is the most stupid thing you can do is invest for capital gains. It is gambling. But that's what 99% of the people do because they've never been trained to be investors. They don't invest over here. Every month, I must have cash flow because I am a professional investor here. Does that make sense to you guys here? Where the passive investor, I'm an active investor, the passive investors are this. It's called this here. Oh, I hope the market goes up. I hope it goes up. It's going up. Oh, yes. You watch CNBC. Oh, market's going up. Oh, the Dow's up today. Oh, good, 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 good. Yeah, loser. Yeah, geez. There's nothing wrong with capital gains. When I invest, I first invest for this, and second, I want this. In other words, I want both. The average person is just happy with one. But to get both, you have to be a better investor, and most of these people haven't got the financial training to do that. So that's why accountants and lawyers and all that will say, well, don't listen to Robert, or especially your stockbroker will say, don't listen to him, or your real estate broker says, oh, don't listen to him. You can't get cash flow off of real estate. You know, because they're brokers. They're broker than you are. They need the commission. You know, they're not living off of, they're living off of, most brokers are living off of commission here. Whereas an investor is living off of cash flow here, and the gamblers are going for capital gains. And that's how you can see it. Once you can see it all the time here. So the last thing is this, don't just take my word for it. This is what Warren Buffett says about people who invest for capital gains. They hope the price is going to go up, uptrend stuff. Warren Buffett says the dumbest reason in the world to buy a stock, and this applies to real estate or anything, or gold or oil, the dumbest reason in the world to buy a stock or anything is because it is going up in price. That's what it means. And what Buffett is saying here is that most people are investing for this, where if you really want to be a professional investor, you're investing for cash flow. So one of the reasons I created Teach to Be Rich here is very simply because once a person gets into one of these patterns, it's really hard to get out. It's like a rut. So before a person, can change anything, they've got to change, what's behind their ears. Or if I could say, is this, as I said, I can tell whether a person's going to be rich or poor by their expenses really, really quickly. Poor people simply buy poor things. Whereas I was answering a question earlier, I was talking about, as a rich person, what I buy first are assets. I don't buy liabilities. My assets buy my liabilities. For example, when I wanted to buy another Porsche, I bought a piece of real estate, and the cash flow from that real estate pays for my Porsche. What the middle class, and the reason they're middle class, is the first thing they buy is lifestyle things. They want the nice house and the nice car. I have gone without eating, and I've gone without the nice house, because assets are number one here. And so what makes a person rich, poor, middle class is what is number one for them. For the poor, number one is just pure survival. For the middle class, it's looking good, keeping up with the Joneses. And number three are assets. And when I talk to a person, I can tell really who they are simply by what they're buying, but also what it shows up here. So the reason, again, for creating Teach to Be Rich as well as a cash flow game is they are designed to bust up the patterns inside your head, because if you don't change the pattern, nothing really changes there. So moving forward, again, because our school systems don't teach us much about financial education, we learn that at home from our parents. So on the plasma screen over here, you're going to find out what the poor teach their kids about money. So the poor, like my poor dad really sincerely, he thought, I'm a good man and the government should take care of people. How many people know people like that? The government should take care of you. And so that's why he believed in a government job. He believed in, Social Security, and he believed in Medicare. But as I'm saying, the reason I created this Teach to Be Rich program, as you're going to see by the end of it, is the debt for a number of people, starting with the president on down, expecting to be taken care of.